The price of eggs is up, way up, as high as 49% over prices this time last year. And we probably haven't hit the ceiling of it yet. The price is probably still going higher. What is behind this? Is it just the standard inflationary pressures, or is there more to the story? We're going to explore that in this episode of the podcast. Stick around.
Welcome to the CrossFit Edwardsville Community Podcast, where we hear and learn from our coaches, CrossFitters, and Glen Ed community leaders. Now, here are your hosts, Dallas and Greg.
What is up, CFE community? It is Coach G here. I am one of the co-hosts of the CrossFit Edwardsville Community Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about eggs and what's going on with them. If you've been paying any attention, if you're an egg eater, going to the store, you become well aware that the price of eggs is way up from where it was last year, up to 49% higher than where it was. Like if you were to go to a store right now, you may find that a carton of eggs might cost you over $8, or you may be not be able to find any eggs at all. So what's going on behind this? And it is true that inflationary pressures are a factor in this. They are driving the price higher, but there's more to the story. So back in 1996, the H5N1 avian flu was identified, and it has been affecting the bird population of Mother Earth ever since then. And the strain has, evolved over time. And it just so happens that the strain that has been hitting in the past year is particularly virulent. It is a particularly mean beast and has been running, like surging. So typically what happens with the bird flu is that it picks up in the spring and then it dies off as summer progresses. In a big way, it relates to the migratory patterns of birds. And when we talk about this discussion, the H5N1 avian flu affects both your agricultural, your farm birds, your chicken, your turkeys, but it also affects wild birds. And this particularly mean strain of H5N1, when it hits your standard poultry, your standard farm grown poultry that produce eggs, your standard chickens, the mortality rate is between 90 and 100% within 48 hours. It is a bad beast, this avian flu, and it's been decimating the bird population, both with your agricultural birds, but also with wild birds. And this is translating to reduced output or reduced production of eggs on the supply chain side. But there's more to it than that also. There are several factors around the world that are also affecting the production of feed, like your grains used for animal feed in production and in farming, in growing, and harvesting chickens and eggs. So you have the war in Ukraine that is affecting the world's supply of wheat, since Ukraine is one of the world's top producers of wheat and supplies much of the world. And with that supply chain hit and affected, you have feed for animals less available, driving the price up of that. Other things that can also drive up the price there are several multi-decade long droughts happening in certain parts of the world, meaning there's not enough water, and that affects your crop outputs as well. And that can put some pressure and create some negative impact on the availability of wheat for feed for animals. So on the production side for farmers, it's also pushing the price of production up, which is another factor that can push the price of eggs up. And there are other factors as well that play in with this. And just as a side note to all of this, I think it's interesting to note that it's not, the problem doesn't just remain centric with birds, since we're all connected and we're all part of the circle of life, and whole ecological systems are affected by anything that causes mass casualties of any animal species, birds included. So if you look back to the policies of the Chinese government, 1959 to 1961, it's a really interesting case study. And back then, the Chinese government had identified 4 major, quote, pests that they wanted to eradicate or eliminate as part of a control program. And one of the 4 major pests that they wanted to address was sparrows. So they had some other things on this list too. The other pests included like mosquitoes. I don't know how successful they were with affecting the population of mosquitoes, what they did toward that end, but their initiatives to reduce the population of sparrows was very successful and had unintended consequences, because birds, including the sparrow, are a very, very important piece of the ecological puzzle when it comes to reducing the population of insects that feed on your crops. So with the systematic elimination, the sparrow genocide that happened during this time period, 1959, 1961, back in China, it had the unintended consequence of also reducing the major pest control, reducing the sparrow population, also eliminated the key element of the ecological chain that was responsible for reducing insect populations that decimated crops. So with the elimination of sparrows, there was rampant growth in these insects that would decimate the crops, and millions of people starved to death because the available food supply in China during those years was significantly affected by this policy. So where I'm going with that is that if you have a mass casualty situation with birds, as we do have right now with the H5N1 avian flu, there's also downstream and immediate direct consequences on the rest of the ecological system. So you have fewer birds. That one of the things that they do is help to control the population of insects. That population of insects then becomes greater and can negatively, directly, and reciprocally affect the production of crops. So now you have fewer crops being produced, and if those crops are wheat or ultimately used as animal feed, then boom, just like we mentioned before, it continues to drive the price up. So what can you do about this? Like, now that you kind of understand the problem a little bit better, what can you do? So for the majority of us, it's going to be riding out the storm, and we're probably looking, at continued increase in price of eggs and chicken, probably for the next couple quarters, probably up until at least mid 2023. Now that said, in the short term, you can adjust your consumption of eggs, which I find this interesting. Maybe you also will. The average American consumes 288 eggs a year. That is 24 dozen eggs per year, as well as who knows how much chicken in various formats, from grilled chicken, barbecue chicken, baked chicken, fried chicken, all the variations of chicken. And so like this, you might have to look at different ways of obtaining eggs if you want to keep that as a part of your diet. So you can probably find powdered eggs. You can probably find prepackaged egg whites that have been available in stores since before the recent surge and recent virulent strain of H5N1 hit. And so these eggs are completely unaffected. They're still very healthy to eat, even if they've been on the shelf for a while. Similarly, you may be able to find freeze-dried eggs, which are still healthy and still an option for you, even if they've been on the shelf for a while. For the same reason, They were never touched by the H5N1 current strains and virulent strains of the avian flu. Now, if you are willing to go the extra mile, and this is something that I'm starting to explore with my family here at home, is the potential for growing our own chickens and harvesting our own eggs. And there's definitely a learning curve to doing something like that, learning animal husbandry, growing and having chickens at home that you can use and go out and harvest the eggs every day. But the good news is that by everything I've learned so far, it does appear that raising chickens is a very uncomplicated, relatively easy thing to do, from raising them as chicks to having a properly designed and set up coop, letting them out to run, having space for them to run. There are a lot of considerations you do need to know about, but with a little bit of education, you can have a mini at-home farm, so to speak, that produces the eggs that you need on a day-to-day basis. Now, a backyard chicken coop and raising your own chickens will probably never produce the volume of eggs and chickens that you need to have 288 eggs, 24 dozen eggs per person per year. But at the very least, what it does is it gives you a supplementary source that you can go to get eggs, as well as reducing some of the strain on the supply chain that we're seeing with, in some places, people are starting to do some panic buying with eggs. And maybe that's not hit us here. I haven't seen that personally yet. But if we were able to add, so to speak, to the production of eggs and chicken, I think we could go a long way to reducing some of the supply and demand problems that we have at the supermarkets now. So that is a whole different subject when it comes to growing your own chickens and harvesting your own eggs, but it's probably worth exploring if you want to find a way to reduce your costs for eggs, as well as have a supplementary source of eggs and chicken. So anyway, hopefully this has been helpful and valuable to augment your understanding of the rising egg costs and potentially some things you can do to ease some of that problem for yourself and your family. Anyway, thanks for joining us on this episode of the podcast. Thank you for sharing your time with us, and we're very excited to see you in the next episode. Peace.